unless a certain level of intimacy has been established. And I mean, just use common sense. That kind of goes together. And then your level of intimacy begins with attraction. So it's the degree to which you want to form or maintain a relationship. So, you have an initial attraction to someone for whatever reason. And again, we're not talking necessarily sexual attraction. We're talking about you really like that someone is outgoing, or you appreciate that someone is so happy all the time, or someone is really, really, really good at their job and you really admire that about them. So there's some level of attraction there that you are intrigued or interested about this person. So then that leads you to the degree to which you want to form or maintain a relationship. So, okay, I have an attraction for whatever reason, so am I going to take this further? Do I want a deeper level of intimacy with this person? And if so, then you go through the process of going from strangers to more intimate partners. So when we're talking about attraction, there's several different components there. There can be a short-term initial attraction. That's usually the very initial moments. It's the degree to which we see potential for the relationship. So I think that there is something about that person that I could enjoy getting to know. So we see potential for the relationship. It's short term, doesn't necessarily mean if we never see that person again, the likelihood that we're going to continue to remember that person is probably not very strong. So it's short term and it's initial. It's almost like your first impression, which we've talked about. Is there a potential there? Yes or no? You may find someone attractive, but you may never introduce yourself. It may never go further than that short-term initial attraction, and that's fine. But that is the first component to developing deeper levels of intimacy if that occurs. Then there's long-term maintenance attraction, which is kind of on the opposite end. So this refers to the level of liking or positive attraction that motivates us to maintain or escalate a relationship, and it's important to look at those two. So, we reach a certain level of liking with a person or a positive attraction with a person. So we then have motivation to either maintain where we are. So we've reached 5 on a scale of 10 level of intimacy. So we're either going to maintain ourselves at a 5, or we're going to escalate the relationship so that we move up to a 6 or a 7. So if you think back to your paragraph about your best friend, what was the initial attraction to your best friend? And what about the long-term maintenance attractions? What continued to be attractive about that person? What long-term maintenance attractions were there so that the relationship continued and that your best friendship grew? So just as an aside, the number one initial attraction, according to research, is a desirable personality. So if we're thinking short-term initial attraction, it is most often a desirable personality. So something about their personality is pleasant. And then the number one maintenance attraction is warmth and kindness. And then it's followed by desirable personality. So interestingly, having a desirable personality will not only make people interested in you initially, but will also make people want to continue to be interested in you. So maybe the meaning of life on some level is developing a desirable personality so that you have friends. Okay, elements of interpersonal attraction. So, we've looked at all of these different components. I want to give you some specifics of interpersonal attraction. Physical attraction is there. Something about the way that the person looks is attractive. And again, we're not necessarily talking about opposite sex attraction with a sexual connotation. You may appreciate that someone is really athletic. I will, this is kind of a funny story. I have this thing for calf muscles, probably because I don't have very big ones, I don't know. But I've always been so intrigued by really developed calf muscles. And so, there will be like a woman that will walk by and I'll say, oh my gosh, what I would do to have legs like that. And that is a attraction thing for me, that I am attracted to that element of that person. There's no sexual attraction, but I find something about that person physically attractive. So that is one of the primary elements of interpersonal attraction. Now, credibility comes in as well, which kind of in conjunction with credibility is competence and charisma. So you can kind of lump those all into one category, but basically you're credible, you're competent, and you have charisma. Those are things that draw people into you. So there's another element, proximity. We've talked a little about that. Remember, we talked about proxemics. So we're thinking about being close to someone. You know, the more you interact with someone and the more you have them involved in your day-to-day life, the more you have the likelihood of being attracted to something about them. Similarity, you know, finding common ground and finding something that you have in common. That similarity element is important as well. Complementary needs. And remember, we talked about the idea of complementary style. So if we're thinking about complementary, it's that the other person possesses skills that you do not, and therefore you complete each other, as one of the students said, which I thought was cute. And so, you know, you have that, you complete me, and he actually acknowledged that it was a little bit cheesy, but it's true. So you have complementary needs where, you know, you may have a fault or a flaw or the lack of something, but that other person possesses it, and so you balance each other out. The relationship potential. You know, again, we determine, is there a potential for this relationship? So if you agree, yes, there's a potential, you're going to be more attracted to that person. And then, of course, reciprocation of liking. So you can have all of the elements of attraction in the world for someone, and if they don't reciprocate that feeling, the likelihood of developing a relationship is not very good. So now we're going to move into developing interpersonal relationships. So I've kind of broken this one down into 3 sections so that I can really get down into the heart of some of these issues. So now I want to move into developing them. So we've talked about defining them and what goes into them, but now let's look at developing them and how that works. If we think about developing relationships, it proceeds in discernible stages, almost like that idea of a system or a process. So there are specific stages in which the relationship develops, and you will be able to discern specifically this stage to this stage to this stage. So you have turning points, specific events associated with positive or negative changes in the relationship. Think back to a family relationship that, of course, you've had your whole life, or think back to a very significant long-term relationship in your life. Think about specific events that were turning points in the relationship. I guarantee you they'll pop into your head right away. Oh my gosh, that was a huge turning point for me. That was a positive change in our relationship, or oh boy, was that a negative change in our relationship. There are definable turning points that occur in relationships. Now, 2 different types. We have causal turning points, which means, for the example, might be a spouse is cheating. So there was a cause, and that causes the change in the relationship. Something that took place created the change. Then there's a reflective turning point, which could be meeting parents for the first time, meeting the parents of the person with whom you're in a relationship. So that is a new level of relationship. So then it's more reflective, almost like, oh gosh, you know, that's a pretty big step. That must mean that we're at a turning point in our lives. When we decide to make that type of step, we know that something is developing with this. So if we're thinking about the stages, you know, I said there are discernible stages, and I'm trying to give you visuals because that's me. We need to think about it in terms of an elevator, okay? So elevator up, meaning we're starting at the bottom and we're working to a higher level of intimacy. So we'll go through those 5. There's pre-interaction awareness. So we're on the ground floor in the elevator. We just get into the elevator, okay? Passive observations and information gathering. And if you literally think about getting onto an elevator and there's other people on the elevator, you do this initial passive observation, and you kind of just glance through, see who's in there, okay, look at what floors we're going to go to, etc. It's a very pre-interaction awareness. Okay, so ground floor. Now we move to initiation. So we may just be starting the process, just be moving up floor 1, floor 2. We're sharing safe, superficial information. So the initiation stage is you're comfortable just talking about basic things, not really disclosing anything personally, not really sharing deep things, but you've at least initiated conversation and development of the relationship. So then you move to exploration stage. or you begin to share more personal information, but there's no physical contact. And it's kind of interesting because we were just at a restaurant. My husband and I and my son were at a restaurant maybe a couple weekends ago, and the owner's wife walks around to the tables and, you know, makes sure you're doing okay and whatever. And she's one of those people that even if she doesn't know you, as she talks to you, she like touches your shoulder and like pats you on the arm. And in our conversation, which was probably only a 2 or 3 minute conversation, she probably touched me 6 or 7 times. And after she walked away, I said to my husband, you know, there's something very special about a person that can be physically engaged in a conversation when they don't know you well, because traditionally the physical touch element of a relationship is in the later stages of a relationship. At least in American culture, I need to clarify that. We've talked about multicultural differences in communication. That's crucial. Remember, Americans have a large body space requirement. Americans are more distant with touch, and that indicates a level of intimacy. And in other cultures, that's not the case. But specific to Americans, normally physical contact signifies a deeper level of intimacy. So if we're in the exploration stage, we're sharing more personal information, but there's no physical contact. Then if we move to the intensification stage, so we're getting further and further up the floors, we get into risky self-disclosure. In other words, we are taking more risks. We're aware of being more vulnerable. We are thinking about, okay, I want to spend more time with you. I want to be more open with you. I want to allow you to know more about me. But that involves risk. And so there has to be some level of trust that's been established. And that intensification process can be actually a long process. So while an elevator does just quickly go through the floors, I need to kind of clarify that sometimes you can be stuck in one stage for quite a long time. So the risky self-disclosure is usually a longer stage, because that intensification process, you kind of are weighing, you know, if this is working out and if my disclosure is worth it and what am I gaining out of this, etc. And then your final stage is your intimacy. So if you think about your top floor, you finally have gotten to that level of intimacy, but that takes time to develop. Again, so you know, you may go through the first and second stages pretty quickly, but then third, fourth, and fifth are going to be more of a long-term process. So then, not to go from happy to sad here, but if we're thinking about the stages when we are going the opposite way, you can think about an elevator going down. And there are 5 stages with that as well. So if you have an established relationship, you have, you know, some of those components that we've already discussed, the stages from moving the relationship forward. That's not to say that this starts. I don't want to give the impression that, I don't want to give the impression that the intimacy is required to then go through the other 5 stages coming down. That's not true. You may only be at stage 3 in your relationship development, but then you can go all 5 of the stages for relationship dissolution. So I want to be clear on that. But okay, when something starts to go wrong, you have your conflict, you're finding fault with the other person, you have complacency about the relationship, your interaction can decrease. That's your turmoil and stagnation stage. So the first stage to relationship dissolution is blaming, finding fault, getting to where you're kind of indifferent about the whole thing, your interaction levels decreasing. Then you move to de-intensification, which is pulling away from the other person and redefining the relationship. Now, the de-intensification process is harder to recover from, because if you've already reached a certain level of intimacy, it's hard to dissolve that level. So pulling away and redefining that relationship can be challenging. Then you move into individualization. We change from us to you and me. So that whole concept of when you have 2 individuals in a relationship and then your shared history becomes a third element, you know, all of that is incorporated into our relationship. So when you're in the individualization, we're now no longer us and our and we, it's back to 2 individual people, you and me. Then you have your separation, which is the intentional decision to limit